So you grew up in a fundamentalist Christian family, and it says, for the description of your book, it says your parents felt called by God to exchange worldly employment for heavenly provision, and they followed their faith into homelessness with 5 children and a cat in tow. So, you wrote about this in the book, but so there was a point when they were employed and they became more and more religious as time went on, or was it always like that? How did everything start?
So how did everything start? So by the time I was born, both of my parents were very much Christians, and but they also had, I guess you could say, pretty normal jobs. My father was a police officer at UC Berkeley, California, for a number of years, and my mother was a concert pianist turned piano teacher around the time that she had me. I'm the oldest of 5, so I was their first kid. And this was, I was born in '86, so just to give a little time context. When I was 9 in the mid-90s, the spiritual renewal movement kind of swept over the world. And today, a lot of people would refer to it as the Toronto blessing. In my childhood, we referred to it as the renewal. Some people called it the Father's blessing. Basically, it was a charismatic revival movement that was spreading across churches, started in Toronto, Canada, eventually went worldwide. And that was really what galvanized my parents' faith and led to intense mystical experiences that they had. And yeah, ultimately inspired them to live out their faith in a more, I guess you could say, literal way, and really trust in God completely to provide for all our needs, from housing to clothes to food, and letting go of our things. I remember my dad saying that he used to think he owned his things and realized his things owned him. And in the Bible, Jesus talks a lot about disciples. You have to renounce all your worldly possessions, and then you can be a true follower and come follow me. And I think my parents found a lot of inspiration in that.
Right. So, and what was it like just growing up? So, a big part of your book is you being a girl, right? And going through just regular things that are happening to girls that they grow up. So, the title, you have sexual purity as part of this subtitle, and that's a really, really big thing. And I was actually really struck by how, and I mentioned this to you before, that just simple everyday things that most of us take for granted seem to weigh just really, really heavy on you day to day, right? Like, you talk actually very openly about, when you got your period, or, reading romance novels and all of those day to day things that just became huge burdens for you as you went on. So why did you decide to be really open and talk about that aspect of it so prominently in your book?
That's a great question. I think because, oh man, you should see the deleted scenes, the scenes that didn't make it into the final cut of the book. I was like, me and my editors were like, oh, maybe there's a bit too much period happening. I'm very open about it because I think, in the type of Christianity that I was raised in, there was such, which the media would call evangelical, and I grew up calling non-denominational. There's such an emphasis on sexual purity for boys and girls, but girls were, my impression, what I remember feeling taught is that we had to be the gatekeepers of sexual purity. We were taught that boys and men would always be after us and it was up to us. And we were also taught that, and I mentioned this in the book, there's no purity test for males like there is for females, because there's so much emphasis on the hymen and on virginal blood being spilled on a wedding night, both in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These Abrahamic faiths, there's so much emphasis on virginity as being the ultimate focal point of a woman's worth, or girl. I'm going to use those interchangeably, basically, because we all know, girls too young to marry do. And I think that when they're placed in the role of womanhood, they deserve to be called a woman, but that's my personal opinion, just for everything they have to endure. But anyway, I chose to be very open and candid about that, not just periods, but masturbation, the romance novels that you mentioned. they turned me on. And I realized later that that was my version of pornography. And I thought like, oh, porn is so dirty and only boys and men struggle with that. But I felt like God convicted me of my literary pornography. And so it was a sin I felt like I really struggled with, because who doesn't love getting off? And I think that it's a very relatable thing. And so that's why I chose to be open about it, because with the period and stuff, it's just something that most females go through. And for me, within the context that I grew up in, getting my period meant it was symbolic of that transition into womanhood, where now I couldn't get away with being an innocent girl anymore. I had to be responsible. It also meant that I was, in a biblical sense, it meant that I was eligible for marriage, even though my parents would never have given me away at 12 years old to be married. I was 12 when I got my period, but it, in my mind, from everything that I gleaned from reading the Bible and my own interpretations of things, getting my period did become such a huge burden. Not only is it physically inconvenient and painful, but for me, in my mind, there was so much weight attached to it, because it just symbolized the burden of responsibility that I now had as being a sexual person who was capable of procreating, needing to make extra sure that I didn't attract male attention. And I wanted to be candid about it, because I know it's something that a lot of girls go through. I don't know what it's like to be a guy, obviously, and I'm sure you guys have your own version of epiphanies that you have to experience when you go through puberty, and your own experiences within purity culture. But yeah, I'm quite candid about mine.
Yeah, I think it's very different. I mean, of course, there are boys who go through, they're raised in these Abrahamic religions. They're made to feel guilty about any number of things, because just these religions, they're completely obsessed with sexual purity, right? Mm-hmm. Which is why I think, it made it into your book, and so prominently as well. But what do you think it is about, like, the obsession with virginity, and especially women's sexual purity, starting from Mary, right? That she had to be a virgin, because if she wasn't, because God forbid, a penis ever touched her, then, the whole Jesus thing wouldn't be as amazing. And she was innocent, she was chaste. You lose your virginity, you lose your virginity. You're losing something rather than gaining a new part of your life. Even the way that we talk about it, words like deflowering and all, there's so much language, and it's pervasive. Even for people who leave their faith, they still have these stigmas. So I can see that you want to push back against that in a really, really big way, but it's a massive undertaking to do that, right? And talking about it is one thing, but what do you think it is about these religions? Why do they try to focus so much on the sexual purity, especially for women and girls?
So my personal take on it, and I'm just speaking candidly because I appreciate this question, and it's one that I've thought about but have not articulated, I think, quite in public before. So my personal take is, I think that a lot of these religions we're talking about are very patriarchal, and it's my personal opinion that I think the men who originated a lot of these ideas and the cultures that they were born in are very threatened by the power of female sexuality and female creatorship, because I don't know when it was that we realized it took one sperm and one egg to make a baby, but women have had the burden and honor of being able to carry that baby to fruition. And I think that I've always wondered if maybe there's some sort of unconscious cultural jealousy about that, of women being the life givers, if you will, even though we all know we need two parts. We need both. I think that it's partly that. I think men are threatened by women's ability to create. And I think that, like I said earlier, boys and men don't have a hymen. There's no way to prove their sexual innocence or lack thereof. And of course, now we know that there are many ways for a hymen to be broken, and some girls are just born without one. So virginity tests, which are prevalent in so many cultures and belief systems, I think that it's just easier to blame a girl for not bleeding than it is to try to find fault with a boy. And I think women, obviously being generally speaking the weaker sex in a physical sense, women tend to be smaller and not as strong as men. I think it's something that I'm definitely curious to study more, and I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by just multiple cultures' obsession with female virginity, especially when it's not a valid way to gauge, blood on sheets is not a valid way to gauge someone's sexual experience or lack thereof. I think what you asked is a very good question, like why are religions and cultures so obsessed with sexual purity, and especially that of girls and women? I guess the honest answer is I don't know, but I can only surmise that I think that sex is more powerful than any idea of God. Otherwise, why would it be so persecuted? Why would it be like the number one thing, at least my impression, the number one thing that religions fixate on, from everything to how people dress, to words they can and can't use, to where you sit and where you can eat at the table and who eats first. I think the gender roles and especially how they pertain to sex, I don't know exactly how or why women came to bear the brunt of that, because I don't think ancient spiritual practices and belief systems were so patriarchal. There's so much evidence from prehistory that the belief in the feminine divine, you might say, was more dominant than a male divine. At least if archaeologically speaking, the evidence suggests that with female figurines and such.
Mm-hmm. I know Armin's been having connection issues, but Armin, do you have a question?
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention one answer might be, I read this book by Dr. Darrell Ray a long time ago, so I don't know if I remember it correctly, but one theory
is the title of the book, just for the people.
Oh yeah, Sex and God by Dr. Darrell Ray. I think one theory is because sex is such an important part of our identity and also something that we constantly think about, it makes complete strategic sense for religion to try to weaponize that and use it as a way so that religion becomes constantly on your mind, right? Especially by asking you, by telling you that you are sinful and you're doing something disgusting, and asking you to abide by some purity test that is designed, like not on purpose, but just through survival of the memes, was designed to make sure that you do fail at achieving that purity test, to passing that purity test, so that you need the religion for purification, because you understand that there's something wrong with you, there's something sinful about you, and the only way out is through the cleansing that the religion offers. And maybe that's one of the reasons why it's so obsessed about telling you it's not telling you that you're not supposed to do certain things like masturbation because it's trying to stop you from masturbating. It's trying to, it knows you're going to fail. Or like, I'm using the word "no" loosely. It just seems like it knows that you're going to fail and that you're going to need the institution to come and purify you. But that's one theory, I think.
Yes, I would 100% agree with that. And I've come across that too, that theory. And thank you for bringing that up, because I think I might agree with that more than my own theories. I think that there's lots of theories that work in conjunction together. And I think that the perpetuating of that shame cycle, if you make wrong something that is so deeply instinctive to being human, and you perpetuate shame around it and tell people that the only way to absolve yourself of the sin of that shame is to repent and become dependent on the belief system. Yeah, it's a brilliant marketing strategy. Genius.
Yeah, it's totally Machiavellian. Like, I used to think when I was younger, and so I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and it seemed like whenever Men, you mentioned that, the women are thought of as the weaker sex. So, men, for their strength and their physical power, right, which they didn't do anything to earn. It's just something that they're biologically ingrained with. They're rewarded for it. The blood, sweat, and tears. When you go and you put work into it, and you're putting the muscles in, you've got grease marks and sweat everywhere. Then you've made a good day's living, right? But with women who tend to have, I guess, more sexual power, in a way, like that's the thing that has been such a big threat, and reproductive power, right? The idea of childbearing, the gift of childbearing, they have all of that. They're made to feel shame about it. So if they decide to use it for any purpose that they want, or any way that they want to, then they're immediately slammed for it. It's just a way for them to, the patriarchal religions, I think, to control women, because they knew that it was it's just a very, very, that men are very, very vulnerable to this, as a threat. At the same time, they use it as temptation. You've got the 72 virgins in heaven, in paradise, in Islam, right? They use that. They recruit teenage kids who are going through puberty, like 14, 15 years old. And it's, and they live in segregated societies where they can't really see the girls or interact with, the other sex. So you tell them, hey, you can go and you can blow yourself up, and you'll immediately have all of these virgins for you. And again, virgins. It's really interesting. I think there are many reasons. One of the commenters also talked about paternity, and that's an obvious one as well, making sure that your children are your own. I'll read out Lois's comment here. She says, the basic concept of evolution, the characteristics of those who got their genes into the next generation were passed on. Males had trouble being sure that the offspring were their own. So those who...
I don't know if that the idea of making sure that these are your children is a biological thing. I do think that might be something that society introduced later.
Hey guys, if you want to join these streams live, get your comments and questions read by Ali and Armin and the guests, and most importantly, to get full access to the full video versions of all these episodes, become a patron. Link in the description below.